If somebody was sitting in a sukkah, but he could only get his head and the majority of his body in, go to the Peirush, and his table was in the house. Or wasn't in the house, it was outside the sukkah. The ochel and he ate, also. He did not fulfill his obligations. Forbidden to do, it's as if he didn't eat. We require that the table should be in the sukkah because we make an edict lest his head stick out of the sukkah and he'll eat, and therefore he will not be eating in the sukkah. Where there's plenty of room for tables, since the table is outside, he might go and eat outside. Stick his head outside and eat. The Magen Mishnah cites the Mishnah. Somebody whose head and majority of his body was in the sukkah and the table was in the house. Beis Shammai say it's supposed to, Beis Hillel say it's kosher. The Riv and most of the Goyim passing like Beis Shammai, even though the rule is usually Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, Halacha, Beis Hillel. Here the Halacha like Beis Shammai because we're afraid maybe he will forget himself and eat, push his head out to where the table is, and so one should be stringent. He brings to the Goyim that they said the Halacha like Beis Hillel, that in a small sukkah there is only place enough for 6 by 6, 7 by 7, and even though that his house, that the sukkah is in the house, because they have the opinion that certainly the measurement of the sukkah, the minimal measurement is 7 by 7, but the reason is because only in that measurement can a person place his head and a majority of his body. The Rambam in Perek Dal Halacha Aleph explains the measurement of a sukkah has to be 7 by 7, like in Yerushalmi, because his head and his majority of his body takes up 6 tefachim. The Shulchan takes up a tefach. According to the Goyim, if there isn't a sukkah only 7 by 7, even though the Shulchan is in the house, he fulfills his obligation. The Shita Rambam is even the sukkah gedolah. Even by a big sukkah, that is a place for a table, since the shulchan is in his house, he doesn't fulfill his obligation, and he is forbidden to eat so. In Sukkah Gimel Aleph it says, the halacha is that you have to have, the sukkah has to contain the head and the majority of the person and his table. Like Beis Shammai, otherwise who you might be talking about. So Nachum Yitzchak questions, how do I know that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel are talking about a small sukkah? According to Beis Shammai, it has to be with a table. Maybe they're talking about a large sukkah and they're disagreeing when the table is right outside the doorway of the sukkah. Beis Shammai are afraid maybe you'll stick your head outside the sukkah. Beis Hillel do not make that different edict. The conclusion is that they disagree in both. By a small sukkah and a large sukkah. So the small one, the Beis Shammai, which is 7 by 7, he has to hold his head and his majority of his body in his table. And Beis Hillel, it's enough that he should hold his head and the majority without the table. And in Sukkah Gedolah, you can sit in it when in the doorway, when his table is outside the doorway. That's called in the house. Toises bring from Seder Ramam, going to places that are lower than Beis Shammai. One of them is Sukkah Ktana. Has to be able to hold a person's head and the majority of his body and a table. And that seems to be the conclusion of all the codifiers of Halacha. Toises says that in the Sukkah Gedolah, a big sukkah, when his head and the majority of himself finds himself in the sukkah and his table is outside the sukkah, halacha like Beis Hillel. That halacha like Beis Hillel, that there's no two disagreements here, one with the other. One can be halacha like Beis Shammai, one like Beis Hillel. The Rosh says that this is the logic of the Ritzch Geyus, Balamoyer and Balaitu. The Riv Paskins like Beis Shammai in both Machloikesen, because there's one reason for both of them, lest he eat outside the sukkah. The Ran brings early commentaries that have the opinion that by a large sukkah, Beis Shammai Machon Nesher is not a Mishnah, and therefore you could have the table outside the sukkah. And he adds that both machlokes and the two disagreements have no connection to each other. By a large one, the reasoning of Beis Shammai is maybe he will stick his head outside the sukkah, and the small one is possible because it's not livable, and therefore if you can't put a table, it's not livable. The Baal HaMeir, it questions on the Rif that it doesn't seem the reasoning is the same. And the Ran explains that a small sukkah halacha is by Beis Shammai, and he explains that there has to be a bit place that you can live in. Otherwise, it's called an uninhabitable dwelling. The Riv explains that even in a small one, the reason why Shammai is they forbade you to eat there if there's no table in there. Lest he go after his table. And he needs 7 on 7. Maybe he'll go outside the sukkah. And for that reason, even by a large sukkah, Beis Shammai would require that the table should be in the sukkah. Same reason. Rabbeinu Menoach explains that the Rif and the Rambam codified both halachos like Beis Shammai, because both of them, both by a big one and by a small one, is because maybe he'll go after his table. And when Beis Shammai said in a small sukkah, that rule applies also in a large sukkah. And he adds that it would seem that the halacha is like the Goinim. But the halacha is like the Rif and the Rambam because they lived after the Goinim. The question is, according to the Rif and the Rambam, the reasoning of Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, and both by a bit large one and a small one is the same. Why do they have a double disagreement? It would be enough to argue one situation. We'll know the other one from the first. The answer is that they would only argue by a big one. I would think that Beis Hillel would not make an edict by a large one because the sukkah is great. But by a small one, maybe they would make an edict because he doesn't have that much room. It will be outside the sukkah. They will only disagree by the small one. I would think Beis Shammai made an edict because he'll go outside. But by a big one, he has the sukkah. He's not going to go out even if the table is outside. And therefore, you have the dual disagreement. Shulchan Aruch basically copied the text of the Rambam. That somebody who was his head and the majority of his body in the sukkah and his table is outside the sukkah and he ate, it's like he did not eat in the sukkah, even if it's a large sukkah, because we're afraid lest he be pulled after the table and eat outside the sukkah. Mishabura says the halacha is that if part of the table is in the sukkah, part outside, it's all right. Sharatzion cites from the Chayei Odom that even if the majority is in the house, but you have just a tefach in the sukkah, it's permitted because it's enough at the table of a tefach. And he cites the Chidor and Birkei Yosef that only the majority of his body in the sukkah is kosher. Even when we say majority, it means even a little bit more than half. But when the majority is outside the sukkah, it doesn't help us that a part of him, even if it's a large portion, is in the sukkah. So therefore, the question is whether, according to Beis Shammai, if you have a tefach in the sukkah, it would be kosher, or do you have to have a little bit more than half on the sukkah, or even the old. But the Chidor feels that even if the majority is outside, when the majority is outside, it's not enough that a portion of it is inside, even if it's a tefach, it wouldn't be good enough. There's a disagreement among the codifiers of Halacha. By a large sukkah, the shulchan is outside or in the house. Is it considered as if he didn't eat in the sukkah, or sin even in Torah he did not fulfill his obligation? Peirush writes he did not fulfill his obligation, even though Rae said this is in Sukkah 3. Rabbi writes from their words that there was a chazal, the ability to establish that you keep a mitzvah not the way they did it, you don't fulfill the obligation even in Torah. Certainly, if it says do not stray from this path with the word that they shall tell you, that makes it a obligation from the Torah. He has a question by tefillin and tzitzis, etc., whether he cannot accomplish it according to the way the Chacham said to do it, to fulfill a mitzvah. If he'll do it kedin Torah, would he make a brocha or not? And he proves some places that you can't make a brocha because you don't fulfill the Torah obligation either. The Halacha cites on the round in the Ritvo that Rabbanan you don't fulfill your obligation, but in Torah you do accomplish the sukkah. And he adds, according to everyone, you should eat again. But just according to the Ran and the Ritvo, you shouldn't make a second brocha. Because Yaakov Paskins, you shouldn't make a brocha at all. Thus we see that according to the Ran and the Ritvo, the shiur of a sukkah k'tana min HaTorah is 6 by 6 for his head and the majority of his body. The Rambam requires 7 and 7, so that you should have a tefach for the table. And in places, the shiur is the Raisa. The shiur Hatzion in 6:34 cites on the Ramban in the Mohammed that even according to the Rif and the Rambam in the Torah, you do not fulfill a sukkah that keeps only his head and the majority of his body. And thus he explains the Gemara that the shiur of a sukkah is 7 tvochim, and they didn't say that this is midrabanan. Just like the question of Baal HaMeir, that according to the Rif, the Gemara should have told us that that's only midrabanan. Sha'itzian questions on the Rif. He says that the reason of the Shammai is because we're afraid maybe it will be pulled after his table, even when it's only talking about a sukkah k'tana. And that would seem to be the literal understanding of the Ran and the Ritva, that according to the Rif, it's forbidden because of an edict. One has to look into that. Now we also have to understand, we have to judge if the Rambam would agree that the reason the small one is not kosher because the Rabbanan, let's say, we pulled after his table, but it's enough 6 tvochim in Torah, 6 by 6, and just like they said, you can't eat in a large one when the table's in the house, only because of its Rabbanan. Rabbi Akiva Eiger and the Beis HaLevi say that the sukkah is like small, that doesn't have 7 on 7, and it's found next to a large sukkah, and his head and his body, and then the small one, and then his table is in the large one. According to the Riv, there's nothing wrong because it's found his table is also in the sukkah. Tosis, he didn't fulfill his obligation because anything less than 7 by 7 is considered an uninhabitable dwelling. The Halacha points out that in the whole sugya, it would seem the shiur of 7 by 12 is deraisa because it doesn't mention it's Rabbanan. The Lashon of the Rambam, the language of the Rambam is 7 by 7. That would seem to infer that it is deraisa.